the Hearth of Pettaquamscutt. The sun was dipping behind the great swamp, casting long, bruised shadows over the half-cleared timber of the Teft claim. Mary stood in the doorway of their temporary shelter, wiping her hands on a coarse linen apron. The air was turning sharp with the coming autumn of 1662, and the silence of the South Kingstown woods was heavy, different from the familiar lowing of cattle and neighborly shouts she had known in Portsmouth. Then she heard it, the rhythmic crunch of boots on dried oak leaves. John emerged from the tree line, his tall frame silhouetted against the orange sky. He wasn't carrying a deer or a sack of grain today. Instead, he carried his heavy wooden harvesting bucket, dripping with the brackish water of the Pettaquamscutt River. He set the bucket down by the door and didn't immediately go to the woodpile or the barn. He stopped and looked at Mary. In the fading light, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the toll of keeping 4 children fed and a household running in a land that was still more forest than farm. "The tide was low at the Narrows," John said, his voice a low rumble. He reached into the bucket and pulled out a single massive oyster. It was wet and shimmering, its shell a mosaic of deep purples and pearlescent grays. He didn't just hand it to her. He took his small utility knife from his belt, expertly popped the hinge, and sliced the muscle. With the grace of a man who knew his wife's heart, he offered her the first taste of the day's labor. It was a simple gesture, but in the 17th century, it was a profound one. It was John saying, "I have provided. You are safe." That night, they sat together on a hand-hewn bench near the massive stone base of what would become their famous stone ender chimney. The children were asleep on pallets of straw, and the only sound was the crackle of the hearth. Mary leaned her head against John's shoulder, her fingers tracing the rough calluses on his palms. They talked not of the hardships of the move, but of the house they were building. They talked about the great chimney, which John promised would be the largest in the colony, a wall of stone so thick that no winter wind could ever find its way to her. They laughed quietly about the oyster lime mortar, joking that their very house would be seasoned by the sea. In an era where marriages were often treated as business contracts for land and legacy, John and Mary's bond felt like the mortar John was mixing. It was made of humble things, shared meals of oyster stew, the common goal of a homestead, and the quiet strength to move a family into the unknown. As the fire died down to embers, John took Mary's hand. They were far from the civilized world of Newport or the settled hills of Portsmouth, but as he looked at the massive stones he had hauled for her, and she looked at the man who had hauled them, they knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. The Teft legacy wasn't just built on land. It was built on the quiet, sturdy love of a man and a woman who found beauty in a handful of shells and a dream of a home that would last for centuries. By fading candle light, Mary began to write.
"The salt spray of Portsmouth, the wind in the pines, where the life of the Tefts and the shoreline entwined. John brought the harvest, the gray-shelled reward, but Mary was the anchor, the heart and the cord. Through the long winters and the summers of toil, their love was the seed in the Rhode Island soil. Then south to the river, where the wilderness lay, to the Pettaquamscutt at the breaking of day. He hauled the great field stones, he weathered the gale, with a spirit as steady as a ship's heavy sail. But he built not for glory, nor for land or for pride. He built for the woman who walked at his side. 'I give you a hearth,' was the promise he made, 'a wall of thick stone where the shadows will fade.' And Mary, she answered with the fire and the bread, with the grace of a mother and the words that she said. The mortar he mixed from the lime of the sea was the bond of a marriage as strong as could be, though the years took their toll and the seasons moved on. From the first light of Portsmouth to the Kingstown dawn, their story is written in the stone and the shell, in the quiet green valleys where their children still dwell. A love made of granite, of salt, and of bone, the heart of the Tefts in their house of old stone.